Is there a YouTube live stream? Yeah.
Yep. As of right now. All right. Welcome everyone to this month's Azure Security Meetup. My name is James Westall. I'm your host at these online sessions. And tonight we are very lucky to have with us, I think, one of the newest Australian MVPs, Jesse Loudon from Lab 3, who's going to take us through something that doesn't really, in my opinion, get enough love, Azure Policy and governance on the cloud. So without further ado, mate, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Really great to be here, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are calling in from or watching this. This session is really a combination of different learnings and different trials I've gone through with Azure Policy as Code and Azure Policy in general. I'm going to try and keep it moving and valuable to you. So I do have a bit of a change at the last moment. I've decided to do the demos first rather than leave that to the end and go through all the PowerPoint slides first. So I'm going to leave the PowerPoint slides to the end, do the demos first. That way all the good stuff gets done first off. Yeah, so like James said, my name is Jesse Loudon, principal consultant by day at Lab 3, and I'm really happy to be able to present this to you today and just share some good learnings with Azure Policy as Code. This session is about security governance, so it has a certain security type flavor, if you like, and but just know Azure Policy is really wide scale. It's got so many use cases that we'll cover later in the session as well. So hope you can stick with us. So I will stop sharing my slides. We'll come back to those. So you should be seeing Visual Studio Code on your screen. Yep, James is moving around the camera. So this is pretty much my home away from home, probably yours as well. So what I'm going to do in this demo is start from a pretty much greenfield policy deployment with a security focus. So I have a folder here in Visual Studio Code called Azure Security Meetup. It has a PowerShell script, which I'll go through in a second. But basically what I'm going to do is create a new file here. Actually, before we even do that, I need to cover some housekeeping. So first of all, what you're going to see in this demo, what I'm hoping to show you as well, is if the demo gods are in my favor. First of all, I'm going to show you this PowerShell script, which is really useful for creating like a local library of all the policy IDs that are existing in Azure today. Secondly, I'm going to show you a load text content example with Bicep, so that way we can actually reference those policy IDs from the JSON files we create. Thirdly, I'm going to show you the policy assignments to management groups. That's one of the highest tiers you can assign policies in Azure other than tenant level. And then finally, I'm hoping to go into a bit of the security benchmark policy set that's out of the box. It's got over 200 policies there for you to use. Now, what I'll do as well is, in case anyone's watching this in the future, and in case you are wondering as well, these are the versions of everything I've installed and using today. So we've got Visual Studio Code 1.62.1. I think this is the latest version. I've just updated it this morning. Bicep CLI is version 0.4.1. Azure CLI is 2.30. And PowerShell is the latest 7.2. In case something's not working in your environment, if you're trying to replicate this and maybe things have changed with the versions. So let's start with a new file, main.bicep. You can call this whatever you like. General naming convention to start off with is a main file. And then what we'll do is we'll do target scope equals management group. So this kind of IntelliSense here that you're seeing, this is through the Bicep language server, through the extension I have installed So this is this Bicep extension here in Visual Studio Code, and that's one of the main reasons I love using Visual Studio Code. It makes it really easy. So so target scope equals management group. So we will do this deployment to a management group level. Save that. Don't worry about that. Now, what are we actually going to assign? I'm looking to assign the Azure Security Benchmark Policy Set. Now, there's a few ways we can get that ID. But first of all, let's create some boilerplate Bicep for this. So if I type in res, this brings up the snippets that are built into the Bicep language server. So you can see there's snippets here for almost every single ARM resource available. There's more being added as well. So we've got policy snippets here. So if I do a snippet for a policy assignment, you can see straight away it's populated my Bicep file with the kind of boilerplate code that you can use straight away. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this assign one, and then I can flip through these as well and change their values. Location, I'm pretty sure I want Australia East. So I'm just tabbing through this. Identity is system assigned. One thing to note is with these snippets, they are tied to an API for the resource. So you'll notice, and if you're following Azure Policy, you'll know that assignments now can use the user assigned identity type, not just system assigned. But if I try and add a user assigned type here in the policy assignment, it's not available. That's because I'm using an old API version. So if I choose the latest one here, so 2021-0601, come back to this type value here. So now I've got the user assigned value here. So if I wanted to, I could actually pass in a user assigned identity, kind of like this code here that Copilot's automatically populated for me. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do a system assigned identity, or none actually, because it probably doesn't need one. But I'll just show you that. And then display name, I'll make this policy assignment 1. Description. So these all these default values have come through the snippet. Enforcement mode, we'll leave that as default. Metadata is okay. Here's the important part where we need to pass in a definition ID. So what I want to do to actually grab that, I'm going to run a PowerShell script. So this PowerShell script is it's actually a modified version from one I found from Justin Groot, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, from a GitHub issue that he logged and commented on. So what it does is it essentially grabs, it queries Azure for different policy definitions and initiatives, and it actually builds a JSON file out of them. So I'll show you how this works by just... So there's 2 script blocks here. Basically, this one here creates the JSON with a category as a prefix. And this script block here creates them without the prefix for a category. So I will run this, and then I'll run these 2 blocks here to create the policies. And this is going to spit out some JSON to my file path. One of them is going to contain all the built-in policies, except for deprecated policies and policies that are in preview. I don't want any of those. And it's going to output all the policy sets and initiatives as well. So these are the IDs. More information can be grabbed as well if we modify this PowerShell. Okay, so that's running. So we have a JSON file, and we have a policy set file here. So if we look at this policy set file, it's not a valid JSON object right now. So I'll make some quick modifications. what I'm going to do is a quick find replace, remove some backslash, change the double quotes to a single, and that looks a lot better. And then I'll also do Control-Shift-P to format the file. So that's valid JSON now. So these are all the policy sets that are built in, otherwise known as initiatives in Azure. So the one I want to grab is this one, the Azure Security Benchmark, into my main Bicep file. So what I'll do now to actually bring in those values is I need to do a load text content variable. So we'll do variable. Let's just call this library equals JSON, and then load text content like so, and then pass in the path there. And I think this needs to be all policy sets like that. And then I do have a squiggly line there because I haven't used that variable yet. So that's the built-in Bicep linter, basically finding that there is an issue with my code already. So what I'm going to do now that I've brought in that library through a variable in my Bicep file, I'm going to actually find the reference for my policy set. So here it is, Azure Security Benchmark. So you can see after I typed in dot, it has populated in my main Bicep file all the keys that are in that JSON file. So the key that you see here for Azure Security Benchmark, that's essentially the display name. That's the display name of the policy set. And if I select that for the policy definition ID and hover over it, you can see the value of that key is the GUID ID that I just cannot remember. So the other way you can do this is you can pass in the actual ID. So something like this. But the problem with that is you have to remember, what this ID is, and then usually you'll have to add in a comment here to say, that's an Azure Security Benchmark policy, right? With this method, you get some cool IntelliSense, and you can find all the IDs locally, which never change, but I have found the display names sometimes do change, and you have to update the JSON file. Okay, so now this is valid. This string here, it's a valid ID because we brought that in from our JSON file, which is this. And so now what we can do as well, we can pass in some parameters to the policy set. We can pass in non-compliance messages. This block here is a general non-compliance message that applies to every policy in this policy set. And then if you want to directly reference a single policy in that policy set, you would use this kind of block here where you pass in a reference ID, right? So let me make some. Actually, from now on, I'll also show you the Azure Policy extension for Visual Studio Code. So in my environment, I have deployed a number of resources. And what I want to show you is through this extension, what we can do is we can actually find initiatives that are in the portal. So these can be custom initiatives, custom definitions. Basically, what that means is you don't have to jump into the portal to go and look at policies that are there. And it's really useful to not interrupt your development flow. So here I'm just doing a search. So I've clicked that policy search button, clicked on initiatives, and I can search for any policy that's currently existing in Azure. So if I selected that Azure Security Benchmark one, here it is right in my Visual Studio Code editor. This is the exact representation of the JSON that is in Azure, and I can see all the parameters, all the policy definitions that are as part of this initiative. These definition groups are interesting. They're actually part of kind of like regulatory compliance. We actually can't create these definition groups. We can only reference existing ones. So So yeah, this is really useful, I find, to actually go and retrieve details of the policies that are in Azure. And what you can do as well. So if I say wanted to add in some parameters to my main bicep file, I could search for a certain parameter that I know exists in this initiative. So, and I could see what the default value of that is. So by default, I can show you now that this parameter called secrets expiration set effect is set to disabled by default, right? I actually want to set that to deny. So these are the allowed values, and I can pass in a deny string through my main bicep file. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to copy that parameter value, go back to my main bicep file, make a parameter, change this parameter name here in my policy assignment, and then pass in the value that I want here to be deny, and that's going to apply to that policy there. And then another one I think I want to do as well is for keys. So I want to set keys, the key expiration to be denying as well. So that will apply to keys in key vaults and also secrets. Interesting to know as well, the reason I'm talking about key vaults and keys and secrets is, and sorry about the bright background. So key vault integration with Azure Policy recently went GA as of 26th of October. So that what it means. So Azure is saying that it's now ready for production use. So I've been doing some testing of this, and I do want to show you a little bit of the experience with using these key vault related policies to manage, say, secrets and keys. So here I've set these two policies, the effect of those policies to be deny. Okay, and then a message here that I can apply to all of them is just to say, change is denied. This is a general message due to policy assignment 1, and then this is going to be a specific message. We actually, something I found out recently is we can't set a specific custom deny message for a key vault policy or any policy that does not use the mode of all or built-in. So let me talk about modes just briefly. So if I go back to if I search for this policy definition, so you can see here the IDs, no one remembers them, but this is the actual policy definition that's doing the governance of secrets. So this ID is what I'm going to take. I'm going to go to built-in definitions, and I'm going to do a search here for this ID. I'm not sure I'm going to find anything. Maybe if I okay, here we go. So if I search for expiration, we'll see key vault key should have an expiration date. Okay. Okay, so here's the mode. So this is a built-in policy for managing key vault keys. And you'll notice the mode is set to Microsoft.keyvault.data. There are other modes available, such as the all mode and the index mode. And I think there's a Kubernetes mode as well, but I have just found out that right now we cannot do custom deny messages specifically for policies that have this type of mode, yeah? So we will delete that custom deny block. Okay, so that's an assignment. What I can show you as well is what if, so this basically, what we have right now, this is a working model, just a quick proof of concept. If I deploy this, it's going to have one assignment with one initiative in the assignment. So you may be asking as well, how do I bring in a custom policy? So I've shown you how to use those built-in policies. Now, how do I use sort of a custom policy that I may want to use and deploy with policy as code? So to do a custom policy, what we can do is we can use a similar pattern of having JSON. So I will bring in a custom policy called audit role assignments. So this policy is one I created early on in 2020. And what it does is it's looking at role assignments primarily on resource groups, but you won't see resource groups defined in the if statement. So if you don't know, the if statement is the logic behind. It's kind of like your qualifier. So, as resources get created in Azure, the if statement will determine if this resource will get scanned or evaluated by this particular policy. So here it's looking for a role assignment, and then it's searching that role assignment as well. This is an and, so there's two kind of blocks here, searching that for principal type alias. So aliases I'll cover in a second, but basically what you need to know is by default, it's looking for a user principal type role assignment. And if you wanted to see an example of aliases, if I go to the Azure Policy extension again, this is a very good use case of it as well. If I go to, say, one of these key vaults, so this is how you can look through resources you have deployed in your environment through the policy extension and actually pull out aliases. So this is an actual representation of a key vault I've deployed. And then if I hover over one of these properties here, you can see it's come up with this is an actual alias. And if you notice there's a star here in the alias, that means it's an array alias, so it accepts and it filters on multiple values there, kind of as opposed to this alias for the key vault SKU, which is a single value. So that's kind of like a true or false or equals there. So the policy extension is very good value. Certainly, I love being able to use it to have these aliases in line. I can see these aliases and find them in line with actual resources I've deployed. The alternative to that is you query the ARM environment using either CLI or PowerShell to get the aliases. But I just like seeing actual values here next to the aliases here. So that's very useful. And then so what I'll do, so now we have a JSON policy in our folder. There it is. So to bring that in, I will follow a similar method here to create a variable. And I'm going to call that policy role assignment. And yep, the name's all good. And then so if I don't want to assign the policy directly, what I'll want to do is actually create an initiative. So I'll do RES again, so use these snippets. Very, very useful. We'll do a policy set definition. Delete that bit. And this policy set definition will be a assign. Let's just call it assign to, yeah? And also what I can do is, because I know a lot of this is very much the same, I'm just going to copy that from above and just replace. Oh, wait, I'm going to take metadata only. Okay. So display name, we'll make this policy assignment 2. It's a custom policy assignment. Description, I think I'll just be lazy here. So we've got parameters here as well. The key part here is about the definition ID. So to bring in that definition ID for the custom definition we just placed in our folder here, we can reference our variable. So it's pol role assignment, and then what I would want to do is reference the ID of that pol role assignment, and then the ID, I think properties.id. Does it even have an ID? Maybe I don't want the ID. Actually, I've skipped a step. So even before this is just the definition. So what I want to do is I actually want to create a definition. Now there's a couple snippets here you can use. They all have different boilerplate code. What I found that works well with this pattern is basically just to do a quick snippet like this. So this is a policy definition resource, and then this is the name of it. And I can reference that JSON file that I brought in and just get the properties of it. So I don't even need to look up the ID. I'm basically just bringing in the properties of that JSON actually. Yeah, so that's the step I missed. So once I have that resource and I'm creating that at management group level, I then have an initiative or the policy set, and I can look at the resource for it, so the definition resource, and I'll just go for the ID of that there. And then what I can also do is take that and do something like a name, I believe. Properties, display name. So I can dot source into the display name, and I don't think I need to change any parameters. And then that is the bare minimum. So that's an initiative. Following on from that, I will have an assignment as well. So I'm going to copy this assignment, create assignment 2, and this should change to policy set 1. That is not an assignment, that's a policy set. So this is assignment 2. And then what I'll do is I'll bring in that policy set, like, bring in the ID of it. And then I can remove these parameters. Maybe I'll leave the non-compliance message there. So that is the general, that's the general flow of policy development as of today in November 2021. So I've shown you a few things using low text content to bring in local JSON. This pattern is also useful, I've heard, for using things like workbooks for log analytics. So if you have a large workbook, you may want to import that into your deployment using this kind of pattern. And I've also shown you the Azure Policy extension, which is super useful. And now let's go into a bit of the security benchmark. So the actual initiative that I've assigned here. Of course, I've already assigned it to my environment. Come on. So this is the environment that I've targeted, and I've got my dev management group here. Assignment. So that's for the Azure security benchmark. Let me zoom in a bit. And I've got a security baseline here with my role assignment. Now, this security benchmark initiative, the reason I want to talk about this, because it has over 200 policies out of the box. And if you were looking to onboard governance to your environment, this is probably one of the first things I would do in terms of rolling out some baseline policy governance to any management group or subscription that you may be looking after. So you can see here it's got 205 policies. These groups are aligned to different frameworks and regulatory categories. And then if I look at the policies, you can see the status of different compliance states in my environment, because I've deployed a number of resources. And so you can see also the deny effect for these two. I'll just zoom in here. These two key vault related policies here for secrets and keys that should have an expiration date. So I've already passed in a parameter value to set these both to deny. And then I do have some non-compliant resources here, which means that if I go into look at these non-compliant resources, so there's a key vault here that is obviously having some secrets that do not have an expiration date. And you can even see here what the secret names are. So I won't tell you the secret values, but it will tell you the secret names. This is very interesting. I've never seen this before, but so also the experience now that I'm denying key vault secrets from being created without an expiration date is like this. So if I go to one of these key vaults, let's try this one. So I will new secret here. Just typing value, new secret. So I'm not going to set an expiration date. And I've gotten an error there. So it's saying it's been denied by the security benchmark dev management group policy set. Please contact your administrator. So in this case, I would have absolutely loved to have a custom deny message here to say, you need to set an expiration date for your secret. And that's why it's being denied. But as I just mentioned, it's not currently possible because of the mode of the underlying definition doesn't support custom deny messages specific to the policy. So if I now take a expiration date, go and create that, then it passes the evaluation of the policy. And the same thing applies to keys as well, because I've got denies on keys as well. So if I just create a test key here, don't set an expiration date, you can see I get the same deny message here, general deny message, and then I will set an expiration date, create that, and off we go. So this is, I think this is a really cool example of policy governance of keys and secrets and key vaults, just using the built-in policies that Microsoft provide from the Azure Security Benchmark. And yeah, so that's really a lot of, so just before I move on to the PowerPoint bit as well, and if you have any questions about that demo, please reach out. So there's a number of different policies specific to key vault governance. So there's certificate policies, key policies, which I've shown one of them to you as well, with denying the expiration date, denying keys being created without an expiration date. There's secret policies as well. And there's some policies just for key vaults, things like, having purge protection enabled, or the key vault needing to use a virtual network service endpoint there. So just be aware of that. These are the built-in policy definitions available today. Hopefully that was useful. That's the end of the demo. What I will do now is switch back over to slides. Okay, so I love this slide, but I hate this slide because it's also a little bit too much information, but I feel like it's good value in a way as well. So this is the ecosystem. This is what I work with pretty much every day, almost, in terms of policy governance and policy as code. So there's the docs. I'm often going to Azure Policy docs, really good resource there. ARM template references, API references, they're super useful as well. It's a lot easier now that you have the Visual Studio Code extension for Azure Policy as well. Maybe you don't have to go looking up different things. Also, the Bicep extension is good value to see different properties that you may have had to get from the ARM template references. And there's two main code repos that I really work with. There's the Azure Policy repo, the main one, and then there's a community policy repo as well, which is kind of like an unofficial library, I guess, of just community contributions for different custom policies. Tools, I've covered Azure CLI a little bit in this demo. GitHub, of course, source control. Azure DevOps, very, very common. Azure Policy VS Code extension, I've shown you that in the demo. Languages, JSON is absolutely unavoidable. you're going to work with JSON, whether you're using Bicep, Terraform, or PowerShell. You're going to look at JSON. You're going to troubleshoot JSON. You're going to love it, I think, eventually. ARM templates. Bicep builds ARM templates. So if you're using Bicep, you natively will be using ARM templates as well. PowerShell is really, really good for, like I showed you in the demo. It's that really imperative way of pulling and creating policy libraries. I also use it for doing a cleanup of resources and also querying compliance data as well when I need to, and just building like a report of that. So that's very good for imperative and kind of ad hoc tasks. Terraform and Bicep, they're very, very similar these days in terms of declarative experience, but there's obvious differences between the two. Terraform being one that has been along for quite some time. Most people have experience with Terraform because it was obviously in the market before Bicep. Bicep has a big sort of following these days because of the kind of news and media it gets, and it does have certain differences which I've shown you in this demo compared to the Terraform experience. But honestly, I use everything here. Everything is what I use. From the community side, there's a very useful website called azadvertiser.net. If you haven't seen that or checked it out, please do so. It's made by Julian Hayward. He's a Microsoft engineer who basically released this website, and there's other tools as well he's released, but this is a great tool for looking at the aliases that are possible. And that's where these stats have come from as well. So these stats you see here on the right are from this website that he's basically built himself to really provide like a one-stop kind of library or website for everything to do with policy governance and yeah, it's a really good tool. And then there's the sort of weekly, or I think it's monthly YouTube Azure deployments and governance videos that are on their channel. So if you check that out, you can keep up with kind of the latest news with Azure policy and governance. These stats here are very good to actually get a really bird's eye view of what's happening. There's over 1,400 generally available policy definitions, just a staggering amount. It's across 56 categories. So I showed you one category, key vault category today. There's 50 other categories we haven't covered. There's aliases as well, over 40,000 aliases. So aliases I'll cover in a following slide, but they are basically aliases are the smarts to connect the policy definition to the JSON ARM template or get pull request that's coming into Azure to create or update something. So aliases connect that. It's doing a lot of logic in the back end to do that connection so that you can have the governance. There's over 105 namespaces, 867 resource types. If you think of virtual networks being a single resource types, there's 866 more resource types that are covered by Azure Policy. Just a staggering amount. And then out of these aliases, most of them, the majority I found, are actually dedicated to the network, and that's kind of no surprise given the network boundary to your environment is really one of the first things that gets hit in terms of malicious actors coming from external out from the internet trying to get into public-facing endpoints. So there's a lot of different network aliases related to governance. Use cases here. This is just a broad overview. There's certainly a lot more use cases, but I like to call out a few here. Tagging is very common. If you're not using policy governance for tagging, I think you're probably missing out. Data protection, we can do a lot there with policy, like configuring site recovery, VM backups, encryption as well on different storage types. Monitoring is very common. I've done policies that deploy metric alerts, for example. Network, like I just mentioned, huge use case for policy governance. General policies here about just making sure that nothing's deployed that's not in a certain location, like Australia Southeast. You can do that with policy. You can define SKUs for different compute or PaaS resources. You can even do naming conventions there as well through policy. RBAC. So role-based access control is something I get asked quite a lot. This is a template of, or an example, I might say, of an RBAC design. So here we have service principals, and then there's the built-in roles that I've used for assigning to service principals have been primarily these built-in roles here. And then the assignment scope here is you generally want it to be as high as possible, just to reduce the administrative burden. Particularly, the new thing here that I've added recently is contributor. I found that this is necessary for your service principal to have a contributor, at least contributor access for Bicep deployments, because it's deploying an ARM template, so it needs access to the deployment's namespace, which is not natively part of these built-in roles here, like resource policy contributor or user access administrator. By the way, user access administrator is for role assignments, so that's really nothing to do with the standard policy resources. This is role assignment. So if you were going to create a role assignment for a policy assignment that has, say, modify effects or deploy if not exist effects, your service principal would need at least user access administrator rights to create that role assignment to the scope. And then, yeah, these other role groups here, like developers or users and readers, they kind of have a cascading permission list just as you go down the list there, because readers obviously don't need to do anything, they just need to see. And then the developers will need a little bit more access than the policy users there, which typically only need to run, say, remediation effects or remediation tasks on your environment there. All right, so let's just quickly cover effects. I think we're running out of time. So typically what happens with effects and how they actually, we're good for time? Yeah, so with effects, so on the left here, we start with, there's put and get requests coming to the Azure Resource Manager, and there's also patch requests, which are, I think this is specific to, say, tag values changing, something like that. So mainly put and get requests, they come to the Azure Resource Manager. You might be creating, a storage account or updating a storage account. If your policy has an effect, such as the ones listed here, such as modify, append, deny, or audit, then that effect happens during the put and get request. And then if the effect in your policy is an audit if not exist effect, it happens afterwards, because it needs to, that audit if not exist effect needs to evaluate a secondary resource, not the parent resource. So it could be like a child resource that's related to your deployment. So that's happening after the initial put and get request there. And then there's for deploy if not exist. So if you were, say, deploying a metric alert to a load balancer, for instance, by default, that's a 10-minute delay on the deploy if not exist effect being evaluated and actioned on your resource. There is a way to actually reduce that. I found I could reduce it to about, I think it was 2 to 3 minutes, using a new property that's available for specific to deploy if not exist effect policies. And by the way, these QR codes you can also scan, and it'll take you to the Microsoft Docs for this specific example here. Aliases, yes. So I said I would cover aliases. So this is a new slide I've just created 2 days ago. It's based on a blog post by Microsoft. It's been around for, I think, since 2017. So it's inspired by that. But basically, this is how aliases work in terms of really providing the logic for how your put and get request on the left here gets evaluated by your policy. So here we've got a put and get request with an API version. So this is a disk. It's a disk being created or updated. It's using this specific API version, and then the disk, the SKU name is premium, and the SKU tier is premium. So that request is getting sent to Azure Resource Manager as a initial task. And then second step here goes to the policy snippet. Policy snippet then says, okay, we have an if rule here. So in the if stemming, we've got a governance declaration here to say that the disk SKU name needs to, so this alias here, disk SKU name needs to equal to this string, which is a premium LRS string. Now the problem is that Azure Resource Manager doesn't really know where to retrieve that, because different API versions have different paths depending on what's changed. So what the policy snippet will do, and what Policy Engine does, is it then goes looks at the alias definition. So this SKU name, it will then go look in the alias definition that exists, and it will look at, okay, that's the API version that matches the API version for the put get request 2016, and here's the path of where I can find the SKU name. And then from that point, it then knows, okay, I need to go to that path. Then it then goes and looks at that exact path in the put get request to make sure it actually can evaluate against that request coming in. And then if this value here was not premium LRS, the actual policy engine would deny or audit this request coming in, depending on what your effect is for the policy. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. Let's go to compliance and remediation. This is not my favorite slide. Apologies. Basically, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that there are different kind of stages and aspects of compliance and remediation. So this example is for a new policy assignment, when you do assign that to a subscription, and you can assign it to other scopes as well. But if you did, there is an automatic or a triggered compliance check after that new assignment. That compliance check happens at the same scope of the assignment. So in this case, it's the subscription. And then there's really two key points here in this slide that you need to be aware of. There's existing resources that may exist prior to the policy assignment, and then there's new or updated resources that were created post the policy assignment. So that's why I've split it out there. And then both those resource types in different resource states could have a compliant or non-compliant result going back to the compliance check there. And then the remediation tasks you can run. So you can run this manually through Policy as Code, or you can kick it off through the portal. That would target any non-compliant resources that were pre-existing prior to the policy assignment here. So I should probably have that arrow. I should have that arrow pointing to this box. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. DevOps, let's cover this. This is really like, in terms of actual production use. I think you may be wondering how you may set up your DevOps CICD model. So typically what I've worked with is a single source control repo for policies, and there's a main branch there. The main branch deploys to prod, and then that could go to tenant, management group, subscription, or resource group. In terms of assignments, usually for the actual definitions, I want to store that as high as possible. So I'd want to store the definitions at sort of tenant level, and then do the assignments at management group or subscription or resource group level, depending on the use case. Even before, like, let's say you're doing features and adding new policies, in the pull request, you could do a CI stage or a CD stage into a non-production tenant if you had one. And then similarly, you could store that definition at the tenant level and then do the assignment at these lower levels here just to test it. And if that's all good, then you can then merge domain and then deploy to prod. So that's if you've got multiple tenants. If you don't, this is what you can do as well. Similar model, but basically, if you have a single tenant, you're probably going to have multiple management groups, or at least multiple subscriptions. So in the pull request stage, let's say you're doing a non-prod deployment first, which is highly recommended. You would deploy your non-prod policies to, say, a management group for non-prod management group, or a subscription for non-prod, or you may do the assignment to a resource group to actually, minimize the risk of something going wrong. And then again, after that's been tested, you then merge that to main and deploy to prod there. So that's a single tenant model, which you may be familiar with. All right, so we're getting close to the end. You can see our little mascot there has pretty much reached the terminal in the top right. So these are kind of some next steps or takeaways you can do in terms of your own, learning of policy as code, or, think of this as an idea generator. If you've covered every one of these steps, I think you're on your way to, having a really effective governance over your environments and over your clients. I think that's a good step. If you haven't, don't worry. I think there's a lot of good information and blogs and videos out there, and even code repos you could look at. So there's examples here about using Bicep snippets. If you're using Bicep, you can set up CICD tasks, like I just mentioned before in the DevOps slides, and do custom deny messages through your policy assignments. So these are kind of just some ideas for you to take away. And also, thanks for watching. These people on the top left, these are kind of the role models, I guess, with policy as code. So if you are looking for more examples of who to go to or who to follow, I would highly recommend these 5 people, and there's many more as well. But yeah, happy to hear your feedback after the session and your comments, and feel free to connect with me as well.
Thanks so much for that one, Jesse. That was really informative. I know I definitely picked up a bit. I suppose a couple of questions. I've seen it in the past where organizations might try and do something like a naming policy or something, and they unintentionally scope it badly. So do you have any tips for people who are trying to get started with policy and they find that they might add a policy to an environment, they deploy it, and then they end up working around it because they've scoped it badly or done something wrong with the deployment?
Yeah, so this is a good point, actually. It comes down to testing. In my view, it comes down to testing methodology. How many different possible use cases of your policy have you tested, and have you tested enough really before deploying to production? Are there any kind of edge cases that you haven't been aware of? So what I typically will recommend is, if you're unsure of a policy, a new policy going into production that could potentially have negative impacts, when you do the assignment of this new policy, you can actually change the enforcement mode of the assignment to disabled. So that way, you can evaluate the policy effects and see the compliance and non-compliance state. And then if you get any sort of surprises there before the actual change happens, you can catch that early and then go back to dev and fix that before it actually impacts production.
Beautiful. And the other one I noticed too throughout your session, it popped up early at the start. You had Copilot installed, right?
Yeah, I do.
Did it? Was it actually suggesting valid bicep? Because that'd be a really cool feature if it was.
Yeah, it does. It does
awesome.
actually suggest. Yeah, it works really well across. Yeah, it works really well across many different languages, actually, not just Bicep, but it works with Terraform, PowerShell, Markdown, which is really useful for blogging because I write in Markdown. Yeah, it's a highly useful tool. I recommend signing up to the public preview if you can.
Yeah, I wonder how that works for blogging. Like, does it just open source all your blogs from now on? Like, you just start writing and it'll just generate the rest of your blog. But that'd be quite interesting. Just give it a bit. We do have some feedback from Charlie, who said he's used your baseline in his last engagement. So good to see your code being used.
Charlie.
Yeah. And I have chucked your GitHub, your global BAO GitHub in the comments there. So if anyone's looking for some policy resources, I can personally vouch it's a good resource to look at. And we'll give it a second. Yeah, give it a second for any questions, and otherwise we'll call it a day.
Yeah, Copilot is, wow, I'm really blown away.
It's such an impressive piece of technology.
Yeah, I almost can't do without it now. Like it's one of the first things I enable when I go to a new, workstation. I kind of expect that it just has those suggestions when I'm writing anything in code.
I'm interested to finally get on CodeSpaces soon and see it in there as well. So that'll be good.
Yeah.
We've had a question come up from John. John says, in regards to permissions for SPNs, so for service principals, is contributor required for Bicep only, not Terraform? I missed a bit on that. So I think he's asking around what permissions are required for Bicep.
Yeah, so I did cover that in the RBAC slide. So I have found that Terraform, because Terraform doesn't create ARM templates, all the Terraform resources for policy, with the exception of exemptions. So exemptions are a new resource that are not yet in Terraform in terms of a Terraform native provider in Azure RM. Every other policy related resource like a definition or an assignment or policy set initiative, they're all Terraform supported in Azure RM provider, and that means you're not creating ARM templates when you actually use Terraform with policy as code. So you don't need the contributor RBAC role assigned to your service principal. At a minimum, you would just need the resource policy contributor and maybe user access administrator if you're doing role assignments through that same pipeline.
I suppose, small benefit for Terraform, but you have to wait for resource support, right?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, that's true.
So there we go. Got some feedback from Maxim. He says, great session. Unless there's any more, we might leave it here. I suppose from myself, big thank you for coming out. It's always good to see some of the national, international speakers presenting to the Melbourne group, because obviously, COVID's a wonderful thing. In terms of the next event, we have a session in December, early December at the moment, and that's going to be on some Kubernetes security topics and how you can secure your containers on the side of the platform. So that'll be really cool. Potentially we might see that policy gatekeeper brought up. So maybe it'll be a double policy session. We never know.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Until next time, everyone, big thank you for tuning in, and we hope you have a lovely evening.